Hi.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Apologies for being a little bit late. My router went out and it had to reset.
That's okay. As long as you've not been hacked,
No, I'm
doxxed,
all
taken
right.
out, blacked out, we're good. I'm Mira Selva, a director of the Journalist Fellowship Program at the Reuters Institute. So if it's okay with you, we'll jump straight in. We have the
Absolutely.
yeah, we have people in the room already. So I will just start with an introduction and then hand over to you for questions.
Okay.
And just to say to everybody as well, if you do have questions for Bryan, please put them in the Q&A box and I'll put them to him through the course of our conversation. So, hello and welcome to the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and the Global Journalism Seminar. On the 2nd of October 2018, Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist from Saudi Arabia, walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to get some paperwork to marry his fiancée. He never came out. His murder became a symbol of the attacks on journalists everywhere, of the targeted harassment they face online and the surveillance and threats they face from state actors and non-state actors. It's telling that 3 years later, the Nobel Committee awarded this year's Peace Prize to two journalists, the Philippines' Maria Ressa and Russia's Dmitry Muratov, in recognition of both the importance of and the threat to press freedom. And today, on what would have been Jamal Khashoggi's 63rd birthday, we're really honored to have documentary director Bryan Fogel with us. Bryan gained extraordinary access to Turkish investigation records into his murder and told the story of how Jamal's career, as it swerved from explaining the Saudi regime to criticizing it, put him in more and more danger and eventually led to his death. The documentary, The Dissident, is well worth watching. Please do go on and watch it. It's widely available. But in the meantime, Bryan, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me to speak with you all.
Thank you. Your first documentary, Icarus, was a very personal project to you. It was driven by your own personal interest in competitive cycling, and it's also, by the way, an extraordinarily good documentary. As far as I know, Jamal is not someone you ever met. Why did you feel compelled to tell this story? How did the project come about?
Well, the journey of Icarus, which was 3.5 years in the making from the start of the project to its completion, was such a whirlwind, and the end result of standing on the stage, winning an Academy Award for uh, really what was uncovering and bringing forward to the world what was the single biggest doping plot scandal in Olympic or sport history, but also protecting a whistleblower, Gregory Rodchenkov, and ultimately, as Gregory would say, saving his life. It placed me in a situation where I felt like I had, I guess, in many ways, an obligation to continue to try to make work now that I had access to resources and capital to make films that I wanted to do, that I thought would follow in those footsteps of what was Icarus. And, sadly, on October 2nd, 2018, apologies, Jamal Khashoggi walked into that consulate to never come out again. And as the story broke, that, sorry, I have some allergies there, but it was in fact Saudi Arabia that had murdered him. Um, I was just so taken by the audacity that we were in a world that this could happen, and especially after dealing with all the Russian issues regarding Icarus. And I thought to myself, hey, maybe this is my next film. And I began in middle of October, starting to reach out to the Washington Post, to Hatice Cengiz, and there was a story breaking about Omar Abdulaziz, the young Saudi dissident in Canada who had been hacked because he was working with Jamal. And as I spent the next 4 months gaining the access and trust of these people and the Turkish government, I decided that this was indeed going to be the next film I made. And that was kind of the journey for me of how I got into the story, but also why I decided to make the film.
Can you talk a bit about this process of gaining the trust of these people? I was very struck in particular about your access and relationship with the Turkish investigators, because Turkey, with the other face, is the world's biggest jailer of journalists and is not known for press freedom. And yet on this, you have kind of highlighted the fact that they took this seriously and were willing to engage with you. How did you build this relationship with them?
Well, first of all, I made a decision going in that, this was not the film or the project to dive into Turkey's human rights records, whether or not they've been jailing journalists and, everything that happened with the Gulenist coup. And, it obviously is investigative journalists or journalists involved in, uncovering stories on human rights abuses. There are several in Turkey, but that was not the point of the film that I was going to make. And if I went down that rabbit hole, I wouldn't be able to tell the story of Jamal Khashoggi's murder in the way that I was able to in The Dissident, without Turkey's involvement, without the government helping me, because how things work there is not like, let's say, the United States or the UK or whatever, Switzerland or France, and you can go and do things with or without the government support. In this case, particularly, without the government support, I couldn't have made the film. And when I mean support is their access. They're allowing me to interview the key officials, to speak to the chief prosecutor, the head of Turkey's Department of Justice, their CIA forensic examiner, the president's spokesperson. The list goes on and on. And building that trust was a very long process, because what Turkey needed to see and understand was that I wasn't there to get into other issues, that I was there particularly and only for the Khashoggi case, and that in so doing, I wasn't going to be going on divergent paths. And it took him an entire year to give me the full transcript. And that full transcript, which came into my possession literally just a couple months before we finished the film. That still hasn't been released to any news organization or any other agency. I think to this day I'm the only one who has the actual the full transcript, and that came through Turkey, seeing actually what I was working on at that point with the film. I'd shown them a cut, and at that point I had spent so much time there. I'd been in Istanbul for 7 months, back and forth. I had met pretty much everyone in the top positions of the government, and they determined that I was a friend, and that's kind of how that came about, and I was very pleased to have those relationships while making the film, also for my own protection and security.
Did you ask for the transcript, or was it something that they at one point said they could make available to you?
No, I wanted the full transcript.
Right.
It was interesting. I actually really, when I set out, I was determined to get the audio, and about a year into making the film, along with the transcript, they offered to give me portions of the audio, but to have me listen to the whole audio. And I made a decision at that time that it was gratuitous, and that because of the graphics we were doing, how the film was coming together, and especially the emotional connection, hopefully the audience is feeling to Hatice and to Omar and Jamal's friends, to then hear that audio, it felt unnecessary, because we all know that Jamal is murdered and dead and had been cut up. And so to then hear that, it just felt that it was going into the territory of like a horror film, rather than hopefully what people watch and think is also a film of beauty.
I mean, the scene just of the tandoor oven with the ashes at the bottom is horrifying, and heart-stoppingly horrifying in itself. It's interesting, the interplay between kind of journalism and documentary making, which you've done in both these movies. Icarus took home an Edward R. Murray Award for Outstanding Journalism in 2018, and then you've been immersed in the world of journalism with the Khashoggi story, and especially with the connection he has with the Washington Post. Do you see yourself now as more of a journalist, or do you still see yourself as a documentary maker, kind of on the outside looking in? But you're breaking stories. Your access to the transcript, like you said, you have this document when other newspaper organizations don't, and in many ways you've kept the story of Khashoggi alive and in the newspapers for 3 years.
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, with Icarus, I mean, I truly, aside from being a filmmaker and how that came together, I really became the investigative journalist, because before we brought that story to the New York Times, we had spent at that point 6 months compiling all of the evidence, literally getting everything that we had translated. So when we sat with the New York Times, it's kind of funny and also upsetting for me. The New York Times, at the end of their, it was a front page and then 2 full pages on the inside of the front section, then the entire back page, right, with the story. So this is a massive thing, and the New York Times presents it like it was their investigation, like they had done this, they had uncovered it, right? And at the very end of the article, there's a little blurb about, like, literally materials provided by Bryan Fogel, who happened to be making a documentary. And I'm going like, come on, guys, not only did we bring this to you, we brought it to them, packaged in a gift with a bow. I mean, we literally handed the New York Times dossiers of information, highlighted with tabs in it, by section, by day. It was unfathomable that the paper would essentially take the credit for this. But that aside, it was so much investigative work to know, okay, this story isn't going to get knocked down, or that there aren't holes in this story, or that all of a sudden it could turn out that Rodchenkov was lying, or that he was a criminal. And that was a long path to verify everything, even though I knew that he was telling the truth, and I had no reason to doubt him. In what became the second half of the film, and presenting that to the world, but then bringing that to the New York Times, and then publishing their own investigation based on everything we had brought them, and story, was quite a journey. But I guess, to answer the question, I mean, I think of myself as a filmmaker first. And just like in the Dissident or Icarus, we get into these big elaborate graphic sequences and big music and score and sound and how it's shot and how the camera moves. So I always kind of am approaching something from an idea of cinema, of how it can be crafted, how you can take these stories that are real and then turn them hopefully into an emotional cinematic experience, which I think really helps to, I don't know what the word is, but illuminate or bring interest in stories that you might otherwise pass by or read, a couple bullet points on. Like in the case of the story of Jamal Khashoggi, I think pretty much anyone in the world who is following news knew that there was a Washington Post journalist who was killed in a consulate in Istanbul. And they know that Saudi Arabia essentially ordered that murder. But beyond that, I don't think most people in the world knew all the intricacies of what that was. And so for me, that becomes my job of how to take a story like that and hopefully turn it into cinema, but also, bring and fill in all of those details to craft a compelling narrative.
You've done what journalists are struggling to do, which is keep an audience involved through a long, complicated, international story about people they don't know and will never meet. And it was very striking in The Dissident that it builds. So we start with the murder, but then it builds up and up and up to Omar saying, it's my fault, he died because of something I did. And then you go into the hacking and the surveillance. And that in itself is the major revelation. And I think a kind of news organization would try and put everything at the top and then kind of unpick it. And I do wonder if you kind of stumbled on something that would work for news audiences in the same way it would work for documentary audiences, to take the reader with you for a story and don't give them everything at the beginning.
Well, hopefully. I think, the crafting, that film and how we put it together is very, very deliberate. But in the research, investigation, pulling together facts, speaking with all the people of interest, I think it probably aligns more with the work of of an investigative journalist. But except we're involving cameras and crews and lots of equipment. But I don't. I have a film that's almost finished right now that I'm not quite ready to speak about, which again is along the same lines of Icarus and Dissident, and a big global story with kind of big issues behind it and of that kind of ilk. But I'm also developing projects that are not in that space. But the projects that excite me, and I have another one that we're getting ready to get started on, which is an environmental thriller, but involves, human trafficking and slavery and criminal businesses, and that is on a global level as well. So I definitely gravitate towards these kind of stories where I feel that aside from making a film part of it, that I can really hopefully uncover something and bring a story that people might only have on their periphery really forward to a global audience.
Thank you. Let's go back to The Dissident and you and the kind of decision making and your security throughout the process. There are a lot of questions about this. You raised the issue of audio and you decided not to air it because it would be gratuitous. Could you talk us through a bit more of other things, how you made those decisions on other things, where you decided to put in quite graphic detail and what you left out?
Overall, I didn't leave out a lot, in the sense that I wanted to show the audience that we had the full transcript. we, illuminated and brought forward lots of key facts that really had not been brought forward before, like the fact that they had ordered 70 kilograms or 45 kilograms, which is like, 70 pounds or more than that, like 90 pounds of meat, literally right after Jamal had been murdered. I wanted to bring forward a lot of facts, and so I don't think we really left out much in the details surrounding the crime, and the intricacies of it. And I think as far as the world of characters that come forward in the film, which I viewed and still view to this day, that the two key people were his fiance, not because she had years and years of history with him, but because she was the one that went with him to the consulate. And had they not been seeking marriage papers, they wouldn't have been able to kill him there. And of course, the story of Omar, which I felt was is the protagonist and is the guy who's still, on this journey today. But you're always making decisions of is that interview worthwhile? I mean, there's quite a few interviews that I shot that we ended up not using in the film, or when I shot them, I thought we'd use them a lot more. And as we get down the line, I go, actually, this is really interesting, but it's taking a path away from the story, or putting more time into the story, into the film that doesn't need to be there.
How concerned are you about Omar's safety and also your own safety? Did you find yourself being under surveillance, hacked? Do you still feel that you might be in danger?
I ended up working with a couple of the people in the film that I present as the incredible cyber investigators and understanding of how hacks work, and they had been monitoring my devices for some time now. Hopefully they're good at what they do. I think so. But particularly Citizen Lab and John Relton Scott has done extraordinary work. The new, or not new, but the recent global story where they partnered with many news organizations and Amnesty International and bringing forward the Pegasus investigation. John and Citizen Lab, helped on that as well. So I don't, I don't really get caught up into the personal security kind of facet of it, because I think under the work that I'm doing, you're assuming a risk. So if I was a correspondent in Afghanistan, right? Well, you know what you're getting into. So if you're going to that journalist who's in Afghanistan going, well, you scared? Well, it would seem to me the answer is I just I worry about it, but I hope that I'm okay, and I'm ultimately here because I believe this story is bigger than myself, or because this story means something to me. And I find myself in the same situation, that I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about Putin or MBS or elements of that, because I view myself as a storyteller, and hopefully, like any other journalist in the world, that I'll be okay, and that I have rights of press freedom and those kind of things. So I try not to think about it too much.
Jeff Bezos makes an appearance at your film at the end. Did you have any conversations with him about the editorial content of the documentary at all?
Never, never. I was disappointed that Amazon did not acquire the film. It's Amazon for the UK.
Yeah.
Um, but in the United States, they didn't acquire it, or in other territories. But there was never any discussions with him as far as, the what was in the film or not in the film. But uh, I worked with his team for months and months to bring him to Istanbul for the memorial, and that was quite an undertaking, because wanted to see to it that the people that I viewed as being key to the story, on multiple fronts, would be there at that 1 year memorial.
So you kind of are the one who persuaded him to attend the memorial, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, that's quite striking. Why do you think Amazon didn't buy it in the US?
Well, I think it's the situation that we found in the global distribution of the film across the board, which is, I think all of these companies, not putting one before the other. The vast majority of them have investment from this part of the world, the Saudis, the Emiratis. Um, there is a priority and a prerogative of global expansion and growth, and these are big markets. I mean, they're big consumer markets because the people living in these countries have money and have the ability to be able to pay for these subscriptions or buy services. Um, and then I think there is the fear factor. Look, we show in the film how Saudi Arabia goes after Bezos and starts a Twitter attack on him and says to boycott Amazon, and multiple things. And I think these companies, sadly, are in a place where they don't want to take on content, whether it's good for people, or regardless of whether or not all their subscribers would watch it, or regardless of whether or not it might win awards, or get critically acclaimed, if they view that there is a possible financial downside risk or a security risk to the company, or is going to put the company in crosshairs of issues that they don't want to be in crosshairs of. And I think that is the situation, pretty much across the board right now, when you're looking at investigative content like this, that I think it's going to become and is becoming much, much more difficult to just reach a global audience with the push of a button, because there's only a couple companies that have the power to do that. And if they're shying away from content like this, it leaves, films like The Dissident. I think arguably if Icarus was coming out today, but it would leave, a film or films like The Dissident on almost an independent distribution path, which is what happened with this film. Is we had to find an international sales agent, and they went country by country by country, trying to get us a guarantee of distribution, a commitment of distribution, and that the film would be available. And it's largely available in Europe. It's in a lot of places, but it's not readily available in most countries or places, and including the United States, if it was on, a big global streaming platform.
how much, I mean, you've touched on something really important here, which is, funding and distribution. You need both those things for your work, and yet you pick these difficult cross-border high stakes investigations. How much, when you do look at the projects that you're going to do next, how much do you have that at the back of your mind? Like, oh God, how am I going to get this out there? Or do you make it and then hand it to your agent and say, okay, go?
No, I look, in the case of a dissident, and in the case of Icarus, and certainly other work that I'm doing. I mean, you want to believe that you're going to be able to have a big global platform that is going to acquire the film and distribute the film, so that your work can be seen. I was personally, I was kind of taken back. I was surprised, especially after the success of Icarus, and what that brought forward, that we struggled so much to find distribution partners for the film. But I guess it's also just the nature of making content like this, and it hasn't really dissuaded me from wanting and pursuing other stories of interest that I think people should need to see, or that I'm in stories I'm interested to tell. And I guess I just hope that the next one or the next one will have an easier time with distribution. But the fact that I'm talking to you and everyone in this group right now means that a lot of people were able to see The Dissident and have seen The Dissident. So while it might have not been or isn't on Netflix, it is out there.
It's a 2-click find, but you can find it, as you said.
Exactly.
I know we're going to run out of time, but I'm going to keep you for one last question, which is just about the nature of documentary making for this kind of investigative reporting, really. And we've talked about the potential of, what you can do with it. But what do you see any pitfalls in this as a medium?
And what do you mean by pitfalls?
When you start an investigation, I mean, you kind of touched on it talking about the fact of distribution. You need funding and you need distribution upfront, in a way that, if you're writing on a blog, you don't need that. You can get a story out there much more quickly. Do you see any kind of pitfalls in using documentary making to break stories like this?
I don't know if I would call it a pitfall. I think that, what I've always done or am doing is I don't want to be the person that is breaking the story in such a way that you're the one having to defend whether or not this is true or false. There was a decision, relatively early into the process of knowing the evidence that Gregory Rodchenkov had. And originally we were thinking, okay, we'll hold on to all of this and we'll put it, forward in the documentary into Icarus. And then what happened is the second half of Icarus really becomes us following the story after we bring the story forward to the New York Times, and then all these other global news agencies corroborate the story, and it becomes, the story and the scandal that it is. And the reason for doing that was we said, okay, if me and my, filmmaking team not only don't have a resources, we have no way to get into the laboratory in Switzerland where all these Olympic urine samples are held and do forensic tests on them to determine if Gregory is telling the truth. We have no way to have the power of what the International Olympic Committee has, or WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. And if we keep this story to ourselves, while it might be true, we're going to have so many holes in it that it's going to appear that this is not a corroborated and fully vetted story. Rather, it's the word of Gregory Rodchenkov against an entire country. And so we decided, of course, to use those news organizations, and that corroborated and brought forward the story, but also helped me in telling I think, a much more truthful film. And I think the same goes in the story of the Dissident. While there's a lot of facts and a lot of stuff that we bring forward that might have not been previously known, we're leaning in on, all the facts that that news organizations have brought forward, to see to it that everything that we're putting forward in the film is corroborated.
Thank you so much, Bryan. I know we've kept you over your time. Do you have time for one more question, or do you have to go?
I do. I have to be. I've got 5 minutes.
Okay, great. I'll let you go in 5 minutes precisely. Just a question about the spyware. Are you surprised about how media organizations have or haven't really pushed on the issue of holding spy makers like NSO to account, because their own have been targeted as well as politicians and democratically elected leaders? And it seems to have been a story that flared up and then just kind of was allowed to drift. And
right.
And it meant to be an issue about personal responsibility. We all have to take personal responsibility for the security of our devices. But
the question is, you're wondering what exactly?
I'm wondering if why you think we were in this situation. Why media organizations haven't stayed on this story for longer.
I think what's always fascinating to me, and it's interesting because in the Dissident, Farhatun Altun, the communications director, the right-hand man of President Erdogan, says, well, we decided essentially to drip this story because we wanted to keep it in the news media. And they knew that if they just went out with it, that it'd be a one-day story or 2-3 days and it'd be gone. But I think what Turkey did and how they brought that story forward piece by piece by piece by piece was pretty genius and remarkable, because it was like a telenova. It was like a 10-part limited series where each day you were getting more and more information, and it was so compelling that the world gravitated into this story of a murder of a journalist. And I think also how it was presented, that he wasn't a Saudi journalist, he was a Washington Post journalist, brought the world into this story. And certainly that had to do with the way that it unfolded. And so I think what happens is when you get like a huge investigation, like the Pegasus project, and it's all dumped on, the world in one day, in some, one hit, that our minds and the way that we work is, it's always a next. You're always refreshing the news feed on your phone and seeing whatever that story is. And so I think we're in a world overall where we're in a quick fix media cycle. We're always looking for the next story. So whatever it is, it comes forward next, and I think it's very hard for stories to linger. And I think in case of the Pegasus story, well, this is outrageous what's going on in terms of spyware and how journalists were targeted. Not only that, but presidents and world leaders and opposition leaders and activists and et cetera, et cetera. But I think the vast majority of the planet goes, well, that doesn't affect me. I don't need to worry about that because I'm not doing something like that. And I think when, consumers are able to go, well, that was terrible, but it didn't affect me, then it's easy for a story to kind of come and go. and move on. And as the news cycle is always looking for something new, I found, I remember whatever that was, a year and a half, 2 years ago, when the New York Times put forward their story on the Trump tax investigation. And you go, oh my God, they've got him. I mean, this is incredible. They'd got the tax returns. They had really put together a compelling case of how the family and the organization had conducted business, how he had evaded, hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes, et cetera. And yet that story was here today, it was gone tomorrow. So I think it's just the nature of the media cycle that we're living in.
I mean, the thing I keep coming back to is, did I hear you correctly that the Erdogan's communication team told you they deliberately dripped the story to keep it in the news media? So they are kind of managing the story as it's released.
Yes, I mean, they wanted to, there was two parts to that. One is, I think there was a belief, which is not true, that, Turkey knew everything when they knew it, right? But they didn't. They were investigating this, and learning things in kind of real time as they were bringing forward the story to the world, right? So, okay, great. They might have had a bug inside of that consulate and been recording stuff for who knows how long, years, right? But nobody is ever going back and listening to that unless they were listening to something for a specific interest. So maybe their process, and I'm just making this up, was every 6 weeks, there'd be a team that would review, what had been going on in the consulate, bring forward a report, etc. Right? But when this happened, and all of a sudden the guy's missing, it's like, oh, well, wait, we have a recording device. They've got to go back and go do all of that. And not only that, when you look at how they piece together all the surveillance footage and the guy, the body double, and I mean, on and on and on, it's remarkable that they did that. But when you think about what was involved to do that, that was thousands of hours of time to search every camera and go back and try to put that whole thing together. So I don't believe it was like an intentional drip, 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 drip. I believe that they were putting forward facts and more evidence as they had it.
Okay.
But I do also believe, because they did tell me, that there was certain parts of the story that they were holding back because they wanted to see to it that the story would remain in the news cycle longer, that it would become more important. And they believed that if they were more deliberate and planned in how they brought this story forward to the world, that there'd be bigger interest. And I think that was a good approach.
Bryan, thank you so much. This is utterly incredible. And I've got 1,000,001 questions, but I will let you go. Thank you so much for your time, and all the very best of luck with your next projects as well, that we will keep an eye on very closely. And also a real tribute to Jamal Khashoggi, whose name will be remembered, largely due to your work as well. So thank you.
I appreciate the time and having me speak to all of you. It's an honor as well. And I apologize for keeping you waiting for a few minutes.
Well, we kept you at the other end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.